Today's prompts have to do with the rule of thirds and with leading lines. The first image that I'm showing you is by Cartier-Bresson and how lines lead you in. So here is an example of how the lines lead you into this very iconic street photograph of what he did, as well as here are a few more examples. Eisenstadt, very famous as well. Today I'm going to ask you to use leading lines for your image. The other one jumping through too is how to use rule of thirds in photography. This is huge. It was invented in the 1800s, and it's just to make your photographs a little more interesting, where you divide it up into a tic-tac-toe box, and your focal point or center of interest is divided up into thirds, basically. So along kind of the circle where the intersections of the tic-tac-toe board works. So those are the two things I want you to think about: lines that lead you in to the focal point, and then this whole rule of thirds. Next thing I want to show you is I use VSCO. Yes, I'm a VSCO girl. And here are some images that I took yesterday thinking about leading lines and rule of thirds. This is all from my camera roll. Note that I took 10 to 20 images, and I'm just going to pick from my favorite, import them into VSCO, and then let me show you a little bit of just a couple things that I do to make it more interesting. Both the images I'm going to make black and white. So the first thing that I do is I often choose to up and play with the exposure. And you can do this before you make it black and white or after. And then after that, I play with contrast. Exposure and contrast are the two things that I find really, really important. Usually our imagery is a little gray and doesn't have enough contrast. Then I go in and I play with filters. I don't love how the blacks are not completely black in this filter. So I'm going to go back in and see if I can play with the contrast and make things a little more blacker. I also want to pull out the texture of the ladder and the texture of the tree. Note that there is leading lines for this entire thing. So there you go for that one. Now I'm going to save it and then switch over to choosing another image. And I think the other one will be of Freya. And I'm going to need to crop this one first and foremost, because there's a lot going on in the background. So here we go. Clicking on it in VSCO, and then we will go in and crop it down to eliminate all of those cars in the background. And also to really get the rule of thirds. And you can see there's a grid even in VSCO that is the rule of thirds. I also want to make this black and white because I really love the textures. You can see the lines leading up to Freya. I really want to get the textures of the fence. I want to get the texture of the sidewalk and the texture of both the dog and the other stuff going on. So to do that, I need to up the exposure and play with contrast without losing detail. And there you have it. So if I flip back, I can show you again how this last piece uses both leading lines and rule of thirds.